Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for joining us today. Our topic is how our diet affects the way we think. My guest is Dr. Georgia Ede, who is a nutritional psychiatrist. She's a pioneer in the field, which is also called the field of metabolic psychiatry. She is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist who's been practicing for 20 years and is the author of the book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, a powerful plan to improve mood, overcome anxiety, and protect memory for a lifetime of optimal mental health. Dr. Ede, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Lori.
So this book couldn't have come at a more perfect time because we're seeing very alarming and disturbing rises in things like suicide, anxiety, depression, but also things like PTSD and ADHD, and also dementia, which, surprising to some people, is a part of what this book is about. So you really contend that our diet affects not only things like our mood, but also our actual thinking, things that could lead to dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yes, when I was learning to become a psychiatrist, we did not study the relationship between food and mental health, but it turns out that the brain cares a great deal about what we eat. And unfortunately, the information that we've been given for so many decades now has been incorrect. And so most of us have been feeding our brain improperly our entire lives and have no idea how much better we could feel if we ate properly. And really for 75 years, the field of psychiatry has really been standing still. We've been viewing mental health problems as mysterious chemical imbalances to be treated with medications. And this exciting new field of metabolic psychiatry, where the research is just exploding, it views mental health problems of just about every kind as imbalances in energy that disrupt normal brain metabolism. And so what I've done in this book is to combine that cutting edge science of brain metabolism, metabolic psychiatry, with the truth about nutrition science, and to arrive at a new definition of what a brain healthy diet needs to look like. And I wrote the book because I want people to know who are worried about their mental health, which is really most of us now. I want them to know that changing their diet could help them in ways that no medicine can. But the key is you have to understand which dietary changes to make, and they're not the ones we're used to hearing about.
That's right. You really pay a lot of attention in the book to things not only that we should eat, but things that we shouldn't eat, and also when we should eat, because you talk a lot about intermittent fasting and this idea of insulin resistance, and that when you fast, it kind of resets your insulin. And really, a lot of what you have learned and what you're sharing talks about insulin resistance, which is a phrase some of us have heard but don't really know unless we have diabetes. But it's so important, this idea of insulin resistance as it affects our brain. Can you talk about that?
Yes, thank you for pointing this out. This is key. This is really the cornerstone of metabolic psychiatry. Many of your listeners may have heard of insulin resistance because it's often called prediabetes. And so in prediabetes, what's happening is you're on the road perhaps to type 2 diabetes. Prediabetes can progress over time. Over many, many years, it can take up to 20 years to develop full-blown type 2 diabetes. And what that really is you've lost control of your ability to control your blood sugar. So what's been controlling your blood sugar for all those years has been insulin. So insulin will rise and rise and rise in the background to keep your blood glucose levels in a normal range until it can't do it anymore. So what we're testing for, most doctors are testing for, they're not looking for insulin resistance or prediabetes. They're looking for type 2 diabetes. They're testing your blood glucose. So most doctors don't look for insulin resistance. They look for diabetes. They order a fasting blood glucose and a hemoglobin A1C. I would imagine just about all of your viewers have had these tests done. But both of these tests can look perfectly normal even if you've had insulin resistance and climbing insulin levels for many, many years. And so the higher your insulin levels go, the more resistant your cells become to that insulin. They're trying to protect themselves from being bombarded with too much insulin over that period of time. So that extra insulin will keep your glucose under control until it can't. And that means that fasting glucose, what your doctor's checking, that's the last domino to fall. And we think of type 2 diabetes as a blood glucose problem, but it begins as an insulin problem. And we think of type 2 diabetes and blood sugar regulation problems as a problem with the body. But really, if you have a blood glucose problem and a blood insulin problem, you also have a brain glucose and brain insulin problem. Because if you have insulin resistance, which now the majority of us do, more than 50% of adults in the United States have insulin resistance or prediabetes, then what happens then is that your brain is slowly losing its ability to use glucose for energy. So this is a very, very serious problem, because you'll still be able to get glucose into your brain, no questions asked, but it's going to be insulin that has a harder and harder time. As your brain becomes more and more insulin resistant, the insulin itself can't cross into the brain as easily. So you can have a brain that's swimming in a sea of glucose and still be slowly starving to death. And that is what silently paves the long, slow road to most cases of Alzheimer's disease, which is now called type 3 diabetes.
Type 3 diabetes. Yes, I've interviewed a number of Alzheimer's experts who use that phrase type 3 diabetes, which talks about insulin resistance. And as so many of us know, what causes insulin resistance, which is so damaging to our brains, is eating too many sugars and also foods that transform into sugars, which are these processed carbohydrates, things like white bread and tortillas, the list goes on and on and on. So a lot of carbohydrates and sugars. So obviously, one of the cornerstones of eating right for your brain is reducing these types of foods. And you sort of promote a ketogenic diet, but it does vary from person to person, though, right?
It does. And this is really important because, a lot of people, when they hear ketogenic diet, they think, well, I could never do that. And I'm not going to do that as a non-starter, So one of the reasons I wrote the book in the way that I did was to let people know that there are various degrees of insulin resistance and various degrees of various types of dietary strategies that you can use depending on what your goals are, what your metabolic health looks like right now, and what your dietary preferences are. So there's a place for everybody to grab onto in the book. But really what you just said is so important. No matter what your dietary preferences are, removing the refined carbohydrates from the diet, the sugars, the flours, the syrups, the crystals, the powders, all of those refined carbohydrates, removing those from the diet is the single most important change you can make to your diet to protect your metabolic health in the long term. And so these are just carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables that have had their fiber and their nutrients stripped away. And they're really naked carbohydrates that turn instantly into glucose in the bloodstream. And that gives you a really exaggerated, unnatural spike in your blood glucose levels. And then you're going to need a lot of insulin, a big spike of insulin, to take care of that glucose and bring it back down to normal. When you're eating too many of the wrong carbohydrates too often, you're going to see this repeated roller coaster of glucose and insulin, and all kinds of other hormones will follow suit. So when you're eating this way, you're really destabilizing yourself from within.
We all love these foods, and a lot of times when we feel down, when we feel anxious, or when we feel depressed, the one thing that makes us feel better is a cupcake or any of these sugars. But it's important to remember, and you point this out in your book too, that these foods are actually going to exacerbate that anxiety and that depression. It's actually going to make it worse. I try to tell myself this when we reach for those things. Remember, this is going to make me feel worse. It makes me feel better in the 15 seconds while I'm eating it, but it's going to actually contribute to the problem, these types of foods. So we're going to take a quick break and be right back with Dr. Georgia Eid. The book is called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We're talking with Dr. Georgia Eid, author of the book Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. Dr. Eid is a psychiatrist, been practicing for 20 years. So talk about your patients who have been put on this program. Have you seen much of a difference?
Yes, so I've been practicing, really the foundation of my practice for more than 10 years now has been nutritional and metabolic interventions as opposed to medication interventions. So I still use medications in my practice. It's just that I use a food first approach. And so medications can be helpful for some people, but in most cases, improving the diet has really been the most powerful tool that I've had at my disposal in my practice. So the first 10 years of my practice, I practiced conventionally using medications and psychotherapy. And what I was noticing, just I think most psychiatrists notice this, is that our practices are really filling up with people who aren't getting that much better. And so, and that's because medications don't treat the root causes, the biological root causes of the mental health conditions that everyone is a growing numbers are experiencing now. And so we used to think of these root causes as chemical imbalances, but we now understand a lot more about what causes these mental health conditions. The same things, really, the same destructive forces that cause most of the other diseases that we fear, not just mental health diseases, but also physical health diseases like diabetes and obesity and cardiovascular disease, and even many forms of cancer. These forces are inflammation, something called oxidative stress, which is why we are always told to have antioxidants to fight oxidative stress, and insulin resistance that you just talked about. When I use these strategies in my practice, everybody improves almost, I think I could count on two hands in more than 10 years, the people who haven't experienced at least some noticeable, meaningful degree of relief from their symptoms. And many people, for the first time, and this never happened to me before when I was practicing conventionally, who feel truly well, fully recovered from even serious mental illnesses after many decades, often with a lot less medication, and sometimes even without the need for any psychiatric medication at all. So this is really the most powerful strategy I have at my disposal, and I think that's because it really addresses the root causes of these conditions, so many of which are rooted in our poor diet.
And I've actually known a lot of people who have switched away from the sugar and the carbs and embraced a more ketogenic diet and have said, I feel so much better. And you know, you've run across this too, people who don't understand why they're sort of down, why they feel blue. They're like, hey, I've got a great husband. I have a wonderful job. We're just, you know, everything's sort of right in my life, but yet I'm down. And it's probably diet related, right?
Yes. And so many patients over the years would ask me, I mean, certainly many people are struggling with things in their lives, but I've had many patients over the years who have said to me, just like you said, I've got this great relationship, my kids are doing well, I'm financially stable, everything's going, I'm happy, I enjoy my work. Why do I want to die? This doesn't make any sense. And so your external environment can be perfectly healthy, but your internal environment is not. And so you have so much control over what you put inside your body. These foods, these ultra processed foods, particularly the refined carbohydrates and the vegetable oils, and these are the signature ingredients of the modern unhealthy standard of American diet. These foods directly promote, with lots of good science behind this, inflammation, oxidative stress, and insulin resistance. It's almost impossible or unrealistic to expect yourself to feel well when you're eating this way. And I know it's not easy to make these changes, but within a few weeks, in most cases, people will notice really meaningful improvement in their mental health.
Try it for 3 weeks, and the small sacrifices of not having, your favorite junk food will pay in dividends when you feel so much better and so much happier. It'll spur you on to continue with it. Now, you did bring up a really interesting point. Really, I highly recommend the book because there are a lot of myths that you bust in this book. For example, you really go off on vegetable oil and how terrible that is and how it's sort of marketed as something that's good for us. All these oils that are, in fast foods and packaged foods that often contain the vegetable oil, which is terrible. But also you talk about some of these so-called superfoods that aren't really that great for us. For example, dark chocolate has a lot of sugar in it, and wine, alcohol, not a good idea. So some of these superfoods really aren't that super.
No, I make the argument in the book that there really is no such thing as a brain superfood. There's no such thing as a food that you can add to your diet that's going to that has superpowers that can protect you against inflammation and oxidative stress and insulin resistance. Unfortunately, as appealing as that idea might be, we as human beings, we love the idea of adding things to our diets to solve problems. Addition feels empowering and positive and proactive, and of course, it's much easier than taking things away. But there's a real power in subtraction. First, do no harm. Remove the things from your diet that are actively causing the inflammation and oxidative stress in the first place. If you're just trying to take, kind of an average, typical, modern, unhealthy diet, and you're just trying to sprinkle some superfoods on top of it, you're not going to see real change.
Right.
If you just take that same diet and you kind of nibble at it around the edges by removing a few of the things that aren't good for you, which in my view is what the Mediterranean diet does, you're not going to see enough change. If you want real change to your mental health, you need to make real changes to your diet, fundamentally restructuring that diet from the ground up in ways that make biological sense.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take another break and be right back with Dr. Georgia Ede. The book is called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living, and we're talking about how our diet drastically affects the way we think and feel. Dr. Georgia Ede wrote the book. It's called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. She is a psychiatrist who knows all about this nutritional psychiatry. And, when I was a kid, my dad used to say, Lori, eat your fish. It's good for your brain. And as it turns out, salmon actually is one of the good foods that you recommend. Talk about some of the things that you recommend, like a typical diet that's good for your brain.
Really, the principles are quite simple. In order to, you want to nourish, protect, and energize your brain. That's the definition of a brain healthy diet, in my opinion. So to nourish the brain, ideally, you do want to include at least some animal foods in the diet to get all of your nutrients, or else supplement extremely carefully. And you need to tailor your carbohydrate intake, your fruits and vegetables, to your personal metabolism. Some of us do very well with fruits and starchy vegetables and higher carbohydrate intake. Some of us have lost the ability, due to insulin resistance, to process higher amounts of carbohydrate. We may need to lower the amounts of fruits and starchy vegetables in our diets. And then really going beyond that, beyond the meats and the fruits and the vegetables and the healthy fats. Healthy fats can come from plants or animals, as long as they don't come out of a factory. I'm okay with them. Everything else beyond that core is really tailored to your personal likes and dislikes and preferences, but you do not want to go beyond the whole foods. And I really strongly recommend or encourage people, if they can, to remove as much of the grain from their diet as they can, even the whole grains, and even the legumes if you can. So I've made some specific recommendations, explain why those foods, which we've been told should be the foundation of our diets, these starchy grains and legumes, they're really more risk than benefit, and replacing some of those with some healthy animal foods. And I know that's a very unpopular message these days, but it really is the truth about our human biology, what it requires.
Right. You do address that in your book, how so many diet experts say, move towards a plant-based or an all-plant diet. And you say, actually, animal foods, but as long as they are the whole foods. So you definitely do not advocate things like the cured meats, like the salami, the lunch meat, and the chicken nuggets and things like that.
Absolutely not. I'm definitely not here to defend processed foods of any kind.
Absolutely. And so it's not that difficult to follow either, because a lot of people have been promoting these paleo-like diets, right?
Yes, that's not a new concept, but I think for most people, it will take a little bit of encouragement and convincing to show them why a paleo style diet, which removes the grains and the legumes and even the dairy, is so much better for your brain, your metabolism, and your overall health than a Mediterranean diet, which still contains a lot of those grains and legumes and breads and pastas and so forth.
Lots of carbs on the Mediterranean diet. All right, we're going to take one final break and be right back with Dr. Georgia Ede. The book is called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Georgia Ede, author of the book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. This is a diet and actually variations of a diet that can really help people with all kinds of things like anxiety, depression, ADHD, PTSD, and even help prevent dementia and Alzheimer's, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So how can people find out more about where to get the book and also find out more about you and your incredible work?
Well, sure. So I have a website called diagnosisdiet.com. There's lots of free information on the website and information about the book if you're curious about the book. I also spend quite a bit of time on social media and presenting in conferences, and you can find lots of free video information, video presentations I've given over the years on my website as well. So I would encourage people to learn more about these principles. And I'd also like to mention, if you have viewers who are interested in using particularly a ketogenic diet for mental health purposes, I do have a clinician directory on my website and other kinds of information to help you. Please do not start a ketogenic diet without learning more about it and seeking proper professional support.
Fantastic advice. And I should also point out, you put in the book suggested meal plans so people can have more direction. They don't have to think, oh, what am I going to eat? And then also lots of wonderful recipes that are very doable in the book. And then I'm guessing also on your website and social media and things like that as well, right?
Yes, plenty of information to help people get started.
And when you say you want people to avoid things like processed starches and legumes are peanuts, right?
They're peas, beans, and lentils, essentially.
Okay. Right.
Peanuts also technically are legumes. So these are the starchy pod vegetables.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I wish we could go on, Dr. Ede. This is fantastic information, and it's really wonderful that you wrote the book. I'm sure it will help a lot of people. Thank you for being our guest on Healthy Living today. We really appreciate it. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with your viewers.
All right, and thanks to you, our viewers, for tuning in to this edition of Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson, and we'll see you again next week. Bye now.